All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here. We've got 6 items on the agenda. It should be fairly quick. Some interesting presentations, and so let's get it started, please. I need approval of the minutes. D3, please. Moved and seconded. Thank you, Greg. All those in favor? And those opposed? Thank you so much. 1.2 is Emergency Response Simulation Project. Chief Clifford, will you take that for us, please? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm good now. You have to excuse me. I'll have to pop the glasses off and on while I look at the screen and look down at my notes. But good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Finance Committee and staff and those folks watching. Here today, and let me load it up. So here today with a presentation to the Finance Committee, looking for finance to support a series of recommendations. Those recommendations would be recommend to Common Council that approve the proposed renovations to the soon-to-be vacated Fire Prevention Division. I think you're aware of that from a previous motion and adoption earlier in the year. Award a contract presented by ETC Simulation, which is Adams, for the purpose of providing the St. John, City of St. John with simulation equipment that will support the development of a comprehensive emergency simulation theater. Approves the adjustment to the 2020 capital budget for the purchase of the emergency planning, preparedness, response, and testing simulation. And then approve the local acquisition. And I coupled this with the whole package in that it's part of the cost, but Canada LNG gave us $45,000 2 years ago. And part of that $45,000 will be used in acquiring some of the equipment. So I just wanted council to be aware of that. That's part of the cost, the overall cost of the initiative. I think everybody's very familiar with the relevance of emergency planning and preparation. Emergency planning and preparation obviously is critical to effective response. Without the planning and preparation piece, your response is compromised. Emergency Measures Act for the province of New Brunswick provides that we shall have those exercises and plans. City of St. John Emergency Measures Bylaw echoes that as well. It's the first component. We've been presenting the idea of care since 2015, the 3-layered care approach. Emergency planning and preparation is the first component of that. And this is really that piece that we feel is the catalyst of getting community, industry, corporations engaged. Council, through numerous resolutions, have supported the care concept. What's really kind of interesting when we do the studies on successful organizations is this concept of HRO, high reliability organizations. And there are industry sites in town that use it in their process and operations. We've done a lot of study through Dalhousie University on the use of HROs in emergency preparedness. And basically, and I've provided an explanation on HROs and the tenets of HROs in the back of the report. Basically, it's never being satisfied. It's always aspiring to be better, continuing to improve, never be comfortable. The preoccupation with failure is like focused like a laser on what could go wrong. Reluctance to simplify is dig deeply. Don't accept the obvious. Always challenge the obvious. Challenge the status quo. That's a sensitivity operations. Don't get lulled into comfort. Always challenge yourself. That's why we've been at this process since 2015. Commitment to resilience. Errors can happen, but problems don't disable HRO organizations. You have to be adaptable, learning organization. Deference to expertise, and we've talked about this a lot. I've heard councillors and our staff talk about it all the time. The expertise sometimes is the folks on the ground. You have to open that channel, and it can't be frozen by the hierarchy of, I've got my deputies here, and it can't be frozen by the hierarchy of the organizational structure. You have to be willing to listen. So these concepts are what are driving us in driving us on the emergency planning piece. And this will be the longest I spend any one slide. But I got to tell you, this is the impetus, and this is the drive of us trying to get this simulation process. As you know, we've been on the ground on some high-level, real scenarios in this community. And I can tell you we're exposed. I can honestly tell you we're exposed. This helps reduce that exposure. That's where our passion is. So why now in the time of austerity? Well, we're going to bring forward a proposed improved agreement with Point Lepreau. We did ask Lepreau for more money than what we're bringing forward in the next presentation. They came back and said, we don't have any more money. Here's our testament. There are 6 nuclear facilities across Canada that have backup arrangements. Only 2 of them have paying arrangements. Of those 2, the arrangement that we're bringing forward to the facts that we know are the best per reactor in the country. So we tried to get more. So recent changes to the environmental E2 regulations is going to compel our local industry to participate in a richer way, in a more thorough, more methodical way on the emergency planning piece. We've already been requested at least 2 separate occasions since the 1st of January to work with industry on their emergency response plans. The problem with the model we have in the community today, it's all over the map. There's no structure, there's no format. It's St. John Fire, figure this out for us, here's the way we do it. Everywhere we go, you'd be doing it differently. The E2 regulations are going to compel folks to do better, and that's our opportunity. Municipal restructuring dictates a more efficient, more effective approach to emergency planning. We have to use our resources wisely, and I think the next 3 bullets speak to that wisdom. We are going to adopt one format, one model for conducting and participating in emergency response plans. It's our model. We're not going to go here, there, and everywhere and try to adapt and try to play in everybody's game plan. We're going to play in our game plan, and quite frankly, if people don't want to participate, we're going to say, well, come, we'll do the best we can, but we won't be as aggressive, we won't be as wise as we would be if you were working with our plan. We're going to stop going. Deputy Card today spent some time at a site. Yesterday spent some time at a site. They're all approaching emergency preparedness in a different way. One model, one format. Our format starts with hazard assessment, exercise design, emergency response plan testing by experienced emergency manager trainers. And council, you folks have been very kind with respect to our ability to respond to emergencies. I'm very proud of our capability. Those are the folks that should be involved in the planning and the preparation piece. And we believe we have the best team in Eastern Canada, and this model will be the best. And we'll test it, and we'll test people. We believe we'll provide an emergency planning, preparation, and response consumer package unequal in Eastern Canada as a significant source of potential revenue. And when I say $100,000 a year potential revenue, that's very conservative. When people are paying consultants $45,000 for a consultant's recommendation on a plan, and when you take a look at what we have in our community and add that up, and the E2 regulations are making those plans more demanding and more rigorous, I believe we're a one-stop shop. I know that phrase has been used before. So, 3 main components. We need to renovate the space for the Emergency Operations Center. For you folks that have been there, there's a space that currently our fire prevention is in. Council has already approved that fire prevention division being moved to the lower level of the Courtney Avenue Fire Station. That's underway. Purchase of the ETC simulation, Advanced Disaster Management, and the simulator components. Obviously, I just wanted to let council know about we would want to use the Canaport money to help buy some of the monitors, some of the equipment, and also we're going to use the Canaport money for the training piece that's that's part of the purchase. So the finance and public safety case, we believe, is there. We've worked very closely with finance, and they've been tremendous help. Craig Levine and Kevin Fudge, making sure we're getting it right. Legal has been a tremendous help as well. So the revenue from the enhanced 10-year agreement with Point Lepreau will be $1.489 million. Basically, it's protected by CPI, and it's protected by labor wage increases. So whatever those are, it all changes. So when I did the projection, I did it on a 1% change each year. So $1.489 million. The debenture payments, I worked with finance. The debenture payments to pay for the simulator will equate to $631,000 over 5 years. The net revenue after expense is $858,000, not counting any potential revenue we have from the stakeholders that are in our community. And most importantly, quite frankly, the piece that's very passionate to us and very, again, I speak to the HROs aspiring to be better. We've been on the ground. We'll be a safer community. This is an absolute win-win with respect to being a safer community, and the money is there from somebody else. Advanced disaster management, obviously we went through RFP. I've provided this detail, and I'm sure you've looked at it. It's the state of the art. It's the latest rendition of simulation, artificial intelligence, using graphics. We've picked City Hall as one of the imaging, not City Hall, City Market, so that we can have that cornerstone building in our community that others might look at and say, yeah, we need to do that with our buildings and our property. Effective tool for planning, rehearsing, assessing, enhancing skills of the participants required to manage incidents and disasters. And again, I'm not going to go through all the slides. You can see the strength of this simulator. We did put an RFP, had a couple responses to that. We did, through a donation from Canaport last week, 5 of us, the team, went to Orlando for 1 day. We flew down and went to the sim site and had a one-to-one presentation. We watched the mock-up scenarios. We watched the mock-up various scenarios that could happen in our community. Came back the very next day. Funded by Canaport LNG, gave us a check for $15,000. Pardon? Well, we did that in a meeting for about 2 hours. But anyway, so we did do some homework. Again, the list of emergency incidents, and we think about the industry, the industrial hazards. This does everything: flood, wind, hurricane, fire, explosions, human behavior. We can talk about all the things that happen around that. Schools. I know Councillor Norton would appreciate that we can do we can mock up any school. There's a base school in the model that you can mock up in any type of situation that might arise. We're going to do a detailed exterior and interior incidents at Saint John City Market as being one of our landmark facilities. And we're actually using that as a marketing tool if others want to kind of say, yeah, we'd like to get that detail on our site. Railways, major pipelines, major highways, it's all there. Finance department has helped us, input from others. Better move ahead, I guess. Finance has helped us along the way to ensure that we're compliant with the budget and debt management guidelines. Purchasing has assured the procurement process. The legal department has reviewed the backup agreement. They have reviewed it. They've provided comment today. Scott had, this document says they will review. They have reviewed the backup agreement and have spoke to its appropriateness. We do have a number of stakeholders that are very interested in participating, and it has the ability for those folks that have been near the EOC during activations and have watched our team, the City of Saint John team, all of us. It has the ability to be an add-on, a complimentary site anytime we're activated at Saint John EMO. So that's pretty well that. If there's any questions, again, I could take you back to the recommendations. I think.
Well, the chief's doing that. Any questions for Councillor Reardon, please?
Thank you. Chief, this system, how long has that system, the Adams system, been available? And the reason I ask is, in that stuff, as soon as I get the GIS, the new one in the car, it's already outdated. So I'm curious about the life expectancy of the system.
Sure. I think it was 1989, in the late 80s, early 90s, that they first advanced the Adams. So they've been in the market. They're all over the globe. I can provide you where they are. They're all over the globe. New York City uses them. Northern College in Ontario uses them. The U.S. Army uses it all over the place. They're in Dubai, but they've been in the simulation business for, I would say, close to 40 years. There is a comment in, I provided to you today with the proposal, there is a comment around life cycle. That life cycle is in reference to how soon do you become out of date. It doesn't mean that it stops. You know what I mean? It's kind of like buying an old system. If you have a system, it'll still work. I mean, we had a very small simulation system we've been using since 1982. We've been using that at some levels. You can still use it. It's just that software enhancements kind of get you out of date. So you know, the notion that you got a six-year life cycle and a 10-year life cycle, that's to stay current. But they do have close to 40 years of being in the simulation business, and they do have a rich list of users.
I'm going to support it. I was just curious as to how often you would require an investment for updating and that sort of thing.
Our goal will be to, when we model the pricing, our goal will be to model the pricing, and we are going to meet with stakeholders this year on a couple of levels, and we're going to include the acquisition price of the simulator in that ask, and also and then when we bill for utilization, and I think there's going to be users, we're going to bill in that, and it's explained in the report, we're going to bill for acquisition price, and we're going to bill for replacement price. Having said that, if somebody helps us with the acquisition price up front this year in 2020, we would obviously not ask that again in that business case, in that invoice.
Right. Yeah.
So we are mindful that this is a product that, like anything that's based on computer technology, IT technology, it has a shortened lifespan. We're going to build that into our business case.
Okay, thanks so much.
Any other questions for the chief? I have a mover and a seconder.
Yep, I do have a couple of questions.
And absolutely, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chief, for the presentation. You get me thinking in terms of the scenarios, and I don't know, you said something, it made me think of it. Is there potential for scenarios to be built for police as well, or is?
They're already in there.
Okay.
They're already
Okay,
in
so-
there. Those human, I really don't want to.
Yeah, no.
The
Yeah,
human,
no.
the human
But-
component is in there at schools, at different
So
sites.
this is a public safety
It's a
simulator
public safety
for
scenario
both
for them.
police
Yeah,
and fire?
floods are there.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. No, thank you.
It's not
That's,
just about the booms and bangs of our
yeah.
industry.
Thank you for that confirmation. I think the other piece was, and I just want to be clear, the total investment. I was trying to follow along in the.
Yep, sure, Your Worship. And there is a little bit of nuance or differences in it, and it's got to do with the application to GST, not GST. And some of the estimates are, especially on renovation, we've built in errors. We built in 20% errors, but I think the total investment that I presented to you was $603,000.
Okay. So
631.
that's the simulator and the renovations?
Everything, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I just wanted to, and then I guess, again, the chief has given me a little brief there previous. I'm supportive of it as well. I guess it's, I guess I look to the city manager as we're about to go down the journey of, over the next few months of $5 million in additional cuts within the organization to be able to differentiate the why this makes sense. And I think, again, for all the reasons you've stated, Chief, we don't know exactly where we're going to land on all of these adjustments, but to be able to say with confidence this is a longer-term public safety investment. Certainly hopeful that you can generate some more revenue, and I'm sure if a bunch of folks here locally wanted to donate all the money for this simulator, you'd take that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. So,
Your Worship, and I just want to clarify, the total investment of the project is $631,380.
Yeah.
The proposed debenture, and I don't think the finance intends to take it to the end of the year, would be $571.
okay.
Okay.
But it's a $630,000 project.
Yep.
Of which, and then the main element here is that we've got a new deal with Point LePro. You've been able to double the revenue from that deal
Yeah.
over the previous deal, and we think we've pushed them as far as we can for now.
For now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Absolutely, sorry.
Just to ride on to what the mayor mentioned, why now? I think the fire chief covered it well in terms of increased training potential, increased revenue potential for outside people using the simulator, both fire departments, but also police forces and other emergency response organizations. Being better, validating the plans that will be developed by all these various industries and industrial partners. There's one aspect that he didn't touch on. I actually think that this is going to save money in another regard. When we talk about training organizations, and there's a Hollywood saying, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk command and control and logistics. The point behind that is the most important thing to train well on is command and control and logistics. And in fact, if you take a look at any after-action review from any operation or major training event, I guarantee you, you will find comments about the failings of command and control and or logistics within there, of how it could be better. The beauty about a simulator is you can practice command and control and logistics without having to deploy the entire response force. The response force can be simulated. And I think down the road, that is where we are actually going to save additional money by not necessarily having to deploy all those response forces for various training events and plan validations.
All right, any other questions, concerns? I'll call for, just, Councilor Norris.
Just kind of on that, Chief, through you, Sharon, Chief, like, in terms of just your average boots on the ground for that job-embedded kind of professional learning that this will allow for, can you kind of describe, just in layman's terms, what that will look like? Like, in the absence of that, I know that firefighters, police are obviously going through exercises that help keep their pencil sharpened.
Right.
But how much will this elevate them? I know that it's going to translate into better performance in emergency events.
Right.
But while they're at work, how will this be utilized?
Sure. One example would be the Point Pro piece, and part of our worry or concern at Point Pro was that we have, under that contract, we have an obligation to send 9 people there. We've never been able to get 9 people familiar with that facility. And so it was just a crapshoot whether the 9 people we were sending had any level. So the boots on the ground through this process will be introduced to 6 hours of Point Pro through the simulator.
Okay, that's exactly,
And then,
that helps quantify it for me.
and then there are actually 4 workstations. There are 4 workstations where the boots on the ground will be able to sit at the station, and the command officer will have the comprehensive view of everything. And certainly once we get it up and running, and maybe for open session I can provide better clarity. But there are 4 workstations where the boots on the ground will be making decisions and choices. Those collective decisions are all presented to the command officer who gets to see everything. So the guy that's the police officer that's advanced into the first floor, him and his whatever team, if it's just him, he does that.
Perfect. Thanks for describing one way that this is going to look and change the day-to-day programming of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
All right, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Those opposed? We'll bring that forward to council at our next meeting. Thank you, Chief. And I'm going to stay right there, Chief Flicker.
Yep.
And help us with the next one as well, please. Sure. NB Power, this is the agreement for the monies we just spoke of.
So the MP Power Agreement, it's fairly straightforward. We're asking finance to recommend to council, common council, into a new agreement for emergency response and training. That training being our own people and giving them the knowledge. We're just charging them for that. 10-year agreement, all CPI protected, salary protected, from March 1st, 2020 to February 28th, 2030. Before I get too much further, I want to thank Deputy Rob Nickel and Deputy Mike Carr for helping on these two reports, 2 presentations. So here's how it works, and here's how it's been working. Standby fee, that $77,544, folks, is actually the value of that in $218. What happens is it gets adjusted. I just got access to the CPI rate today. So that fee now will be elevated, and we'll have that prepped up for the open session if indeed the Finance Committee makes that recommendation. So $77,544 is your $218. That we put a price tag on that 6 hours per person, and it's $64,619. And so that's the response component of the agreement. We also, any type of a response that we have is fully funded with overhead. The backfill is fully funded. The new 10-year agreement obviously increased the annual contribution. I've already said that. I think everything there is 83% increase, basically. There's what we send. We send 1 incident commander, 1 engine and crew, that's 4 people, and 1 ladder and crew, and that's 4 people. And if the ladder and crew, if we don't have a ladder truck available, we can send a 2nd engine. Another thing that's really kind of important, if we can't go, we're free to say we can't go. So, you know, if we have something going on in our community that's challenging us, and we can't go, that's our veto on this agreement. We would, you know, obviously exercise that responsibly, but that gets us, doesn't allow us to overcommit for something that's happening in our community. In addition to standby fee, years ago, they used to tone us out and we'd head down the highway and we'd be canceled. If they tone us out, it's a $1,000 bill. If we get canceled on the way down there, it's a $1,000 bill. The engine itself is $300 an hour. The light vehicles are $125, and all the salaries are the collective agreement salary, fringes, and all the expenses built in. The agreement provides a richer training budget. Again, it allows all of our firefighters, all of those that could be on the truck going down to Point La Pro, to have that exposure to Point La Pro without actually having gone down there. 6 hours, and I spoke to that. And really, the strategic alignment is contributing as part of a regional response. I think that's still good messaging. I think there are still conversations to be had around a regional response, regional fire. I think those are still good conversations. I think we're not done exploring those, I hope. I think it's again, advancing the culture of continuous improvement. We're getting reimbursed. I think we're going to whet the appetite of those that have to, through this collaborative arrangement between La Pro and what you've just approved, you know, going to council, the simulator. I think we'll whet the appetite and capture a lot of interest. Matter of fact, I just got an email from industry just shortly before you asked me to stand up on can you give us more information? I think the fact that we're moving to one format, you know, and I've checked with legal. Again, we all know that we don't service. I've checked with legal. If we decide that we're planning and preparing one way only, I think we have to be firm on that. And I think that's where the value is. And again, I spoke about the fact that, you know, we did our diligence, at least we tried. If there's better information, we'll continue to work at it. We did our diligence around ensuring we were getting as best deal as possible. And again, we've said to La Pro, and the city manager was kind to join me there on a couple of occasions, and we were sincere. If we don't get a better value, we're not doing it anymore. We were prepared to say bye to $77,000. Matter of fact, in our revenue projections, in the fire's revenue projection for 2020, we did not provide any projection for revenue from Point La Pro, based on the fact that we were truly sincere in the notion that we would step away from that arrangement without a better value. We believe we've got better value for now. Any questions?
Thank you, Chief. Any questions? Again, Councillor Reardon.
Chief, when I read through this, it says that all 6 of the nuclear facilities across Canada have some level of backup response agreement with neighboring communities. Who would that be with? Would that be with fire?
Yeah, the backup response is with some component of fire. Many of them are volunteer fires. And the only one that we could find in our data, and I've reached out, and we've reached out through the nuclear network, I've reached out to the fire chiefs network, the only one we can find is there's one other facility that is actually getting funded.
I was just curious because I can't imagine they're doing it for free, so I was wondering, you know, like, what would the exchange be like? It must, I don't know if it's an agreement to, you know, do something in the community or whatever, but it is interesting that, because as I say, I doubt any municipality is doing it for free, but I don't know.
Some of the industry, and Deputy Carr spoke to Strathcona just, or actually Wood Buffalo, right, Deb? Spoke to Wood Buffalo just, I think it was Friday. And they don't have any agreement. They'll go to the door, meaning they'll go to the outside, and you know what? They may help on a defensive position, keep the fire from consuming, getting involved in the city. In many of our industries, as you know, it's integrated with our community. It's tough to say that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. City Manager. I know you had something to say.
City Manager, please.
Mr. Chair, Your Worship, members of the committee, just on Councillor Reardon's question, and by way of background for the public, I used to be Chief of Emergency Protective Services at Bruce Power. So by regulation, all nuclear power facilities must have a backup response capability. Have an integral in-house one, and they must have a backup one. The regulations do not specify whether that is a full-time or part-time or volunteer fire department. It can be any of those, but they must have some form of backup facility. The reason why most of them are not billed for is because the nuclear power plant is in that community proper, and the community benefits through other ways, in terms of other donations, contributions, et cetera, within that community. Because we are at distance from Point Lepreau, we actually don't receive that same sort of direct benefit, property tax value or anything like that. So it is appropriate for us to ask for this standby fee from Point Lepreau in our particular case. One of the big premises behind this standby fee is the previous model was just a standby fee. Now, the standby fee includes training, and that is a significant step forward, not only in terms of preparedness, but in terms of the financial contributions that we receive. And this whole model sees us rolling that training money into that simulator to then take full advantage of it. The one nuclear power plant that does actually pay a fee for service is a legacy issue. And I think that if they had to redo it, they wouldn't be redoing it that same way. Bruce Power, for example, does not, and that's the one I came from, does not pay any sort of standby fees or training fees. They pay for response.
Thank you, City Manager. We'll go to the mayor first, please. Councilor?
You go ahead, I'll finish up.
Well, sorry, just jumping on your point, I think it's, I think, for me, so first of all, thanks for going back. I just recognize Point Lepreau for that training component, because I think that's important. I did certainly ask questions of the city manager and chief of what's the benchmark, how do we know, can we push for more? So I do appreciate the work that you and your team have done on this, the deputies as well, chief. But I just was thinking when the councillor and you mentioned Wood Buffalo, I think it's, as a host community to a lot of industry, it's not a negative comment I'm about to make, but just it's all interconnected in taxation policy and benefits to the community and all those things. So I think, are having all of the right conversations. We've got the commitment around comprehensive tax reform, and certainly we've been lobbying the provincial government to take into consideration the fact that we are that host community. So I'm hopeful over the next less than 24 months, we can start to much better understand, because I think sometimes we're comparing apples to oranges. Yeah. So perhaps Bruce doesn't pay, but if the local municipality receives $20 million in tax, or if the Wood Buffalo receives $25 million in tax, well, okay, we'll buy our own simulator, thank you. But so I'm hopeful over the next 24 months we can start to have a lot more clarity over who's paying for what. And again, that's not we're here in a partnership, and that's why these reforms are so important. So I just wanted to build off of what you were saying, Councillor.
Thank you again. The only other thing I'll ask is the 10-year contract. We've had like 40, 50-year contracts with other things that have not worked out. We would never do a 10-year contract for a union, I don't think. So I'm just wondering if you could even, I'm obviously going to support this, but I'm just curious as to why you think the 10 years is the best length of time, I guess, for us.
Yeah, and again, I've been addressing wrong all night. So through the chairman, Mr. Chairman, to you, Councillor, it was us that asked for 10, and it was because we envisioned the incremental amount. We needed the incremental amount. That, again, even though we were stepping away from the 77, if we didn't get a new deal, we wanted the incremental amount, the $65,000, to actually be able to put it on paper as paying for the simulator.
Okay.
If we had said 5-year, I'm sure we could have got a 5-year. The deal that we stepped away from was 8-year. Again, some of the worries around long-term contracts is what CPI does to you and what wage escalation does to you. Both of those protections are built into that 10-year agreement.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Thank you.
If you want a smaller or shorter, then certainly.
No, I just want that explained, so that's all. I'm good.
All right, any other questions, concerns? Will someone put the motion on the floor for me then, please?
Moved.
Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Reardon. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Again, we'll take that to council next meeting. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much.
1.4, Mr. Levine, you want to knock this off, Kevin, please?
Folks, can you turn your mics back on?
No, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick introduction with respect to this item, which is a request to RDC to cost share the cost of the seawall project. This evening, we've got Senior Financial Manager Craig Levine that can provide some quick background on why we're asking for this. And also from a development perspective, Mr. Jeff Sear from Develop SJ, who's leading the Fundy Key development, is here as well, who could address any questions.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Finance Committee. Purpose of this report is to have the Finance Committee endorse a letter to be sent to RDC requesting that the province contribute to the cost of our seawall refurbishment project. As this committee is aware, the city secured funding for the $8.1 million project through the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund last year, with the federal government. The federal government's contribution to this project is 40%, or $3.24 million, with the city's share being 4.86, which has also been budgeted as part of our 2020 and 2021 capital budget. The letter is asking RDC to contribute 30% of the overall cost of this project, which is $2.43 million over 2 years, which would subsequently reduce the city share by $2.43 million. Without getting into details of the letter, the province stands to gain a considerable amount of property tax revenue and so forth with this site as it's being developed. So therefore, we feel that this is a very reasonable ask of the province. But I do want to highlight, though, if we do not obtain funding, there will be no impact on this project. The city has already committed the funds. We have secured our funding from the federal government. An RFP has been closed for engineering services, which should be awarded in the near future. So in short, we are well on our way with this project. And as the Commissioner stated, Mr. Sears here from Develop SJ, if you would like to ask us any questions.
All right, committee, any questions for? Craig? We've got a mover for it, and we have a seconder for it. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Any questions? Any questions? Craig, please. So it's what you're pointing forward to the province is asking for half of the we're asking for $2.4 million, and you're telling me that there is a business case for them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Obviously, as this site gets developed and more property taxes come into the city, the province benefits from that, and that's obviously just one example of potential revenue for them.
All right, I don't want to whisper in their ear that we're going forward anyway. A fellow might say.
They already know.
All right, okay. I understand, and I thought they would. Very good. Thank you. Any other questions, concerns? All right, I'll call.
I can add one.
Sorry, apologize, sir. Again, gentlemen, my back is to you, I apologize.
Just very quickly, just a very minute point. You'll recall that we've also put a request into the province for bilateral funding. And you'll probably recall also that this was also a component of that bilateral request for cost sharing of the seawall. One of the reasons for this request to RDC is the bilateral agreement does not allow stacking with respect to funding, because we have DMAF funding from the federal government, and it's not a bilateral, I guess, eligible project. So this is another way of asking for the same funding we've already asked the province, but just through another mechanism.
Thank you for the explanation. All right, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor and those opposed. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Levine. Commissioner Fudge, you're going to take the next one for us, please?
Should we pause to let
A
the
little-
crowd come in?
For this next one? Well, it is pretty exciting.
I can hear the stampede
Uh-huh.
coming.
I like the same crowd that, never
Yes.
mind, yeah.
And it's light outside.
We're going to go through this real fast, I promise. Yeah. I actually feel guilty looking at Councillor Sullivan after the night he had coming up here talking about financial statements, so. So good evening. I will be brief. I am aware, obviously, that the Finance Committee has thoroughly reviewed and approved these financial statements. We did distribute the financial statements through email earlier, just for, I guess, so that you could have that for a reference point. And I'm not trying to belabor, I guess, the issue with respect to interpreting our financial statements, but I just want to give the Finance Committee an opportunity to ask any questions that the committee may wish to ask with respect to these consolidated financial statements in light of the recent CUPE presentation and the interpretation of some of the numbers in the statement. So I will go very quickly, acknowledging that you've already been and reviewed these statements. So in the audited 2018 consolidated financial statements, you'll find in the statement of operations a $22 million surplus in those statements. And the surplus on the statements is confusing to anyone who does not know how to read and interpret the financial statements. In particular, during a time when we have advised for some time now the city's projecting to have a $10 million structural deficit for 2021 in the general operating budget, which means we estimate to have $10 million more in cost in our general operating budget than we have revenue that we generate in 2021. That's the definition of the structural deficit and the gap that we've been projecting. And as you recall, as you know, balancing the general operating budget is a legislative requirement. So what does this mean? And I guess this is about as dramatic as an accounting department can be with this final statement. Are we really richer than we say we are? And I'll try to my best just to, I guess, to boil this down in a couple slides. So first and foremost, we are bound in developing our financial statements in accordance with a couple set of standards. First, the standards set within provincial legislation, and that's the New Brunswick Local Governance Act. And in that legislation, it says a city cannot own or operate a corporation for the purpose of making a profit, but also that every year the city must provide an estimate of how much it will cost to operate and how much it will raise in revenue. That's from a cash perspective. If there's a projected difference between the two estimates, the city must provide the sources by which the difference is to be raised. In essence, the city must balance its operating budget. Same goes for the water and sewer budget. The budget must be balanced annually based on user rates, user fees to balance the cost of operation. Second set of standards is public sector accounting standards, which are issued by CPA Canada. So public sector accounting standards are an extension of generally accepted accounting principles. It's just what it's called for government and local governments. And those standards for local governments require that we consolidate all the entities that we control into a single set of statements. And in 2012, we didn't do this prior to 2012. In 2012, the province of New Brunswick implemented changes that all municipalities in the province, and we were one of the last to adopt this, by the way, in Canada, shall produce our actual audited financial statements in accordance with these standards, which is a collection of accounting rules, regulations, and standards that are not the same as how we budget. The reason they prescribed that back then is they wanted a standard set of financial statements based on a standard across Canada that for comparability purposes. Prior to these standards, municipalities had no idea what they owned for fixed assets or tangible capital assets. There was no depreciation, there was no inventory of the assets, no idea of infrastructure deficits. That was the driving force of these standards. A more competitive picture of liability. So when you have an organization like ours and you have 16, 15 different agency boards and commissions, really difficult to get a grasp of what kind of liabilities overall you're exposed to by looking at one single fund. So this requires a consolidation of a number of entities. And of course, note disclosure. You'll see very comprehensive note disclosures on the statements that you wouldn't see on a budget statement in regards to all kinds of information. So be that as it may, at the same token, the province also did continue to require us to budget our funds in accordance with a cash-based methodology or a budget or a fund-based methodology. So that's why we need to kind of keep two sets of books. So in terms of the consolidated statements, entities of consolidation, you'll see on the left side, you're used to seeing the general fund budget, the water and sewer budget. We have Saint John Energy who do their own, and then we have to consolidate all those separate legal entities on the right side into our financial statements. So you'll see the results of all those entities in these consolidated statements. It's not just the general fund that we approve for tax rate purposes. And on this slide, you'll see the actual deficit that we ended the year with in 2018. And so $119,915 was the deficit in the general operating fund audited at the end of 2018. So how do we get from a $10 million estimated structural deficit in 2021 to a $22 million surplus that you see on the consolidated statements. So first of all, on the left side, this $120,000 fund-based deficit, this includes funding that we received on a short-term basis from the province. So in that number, we would have recorded revenue of $3.3 million for the first year of the short-term financial assistance is in that number already. And you'll also recall that was a year we had a property tax assessment freeze that was imposed by the province. That particular year, we also got short-term financial assistance of $1.2 million. That wasn't unique to Saint John. Cities across the province received short-term financial assistance for that 1 year. So when you take into consideration both of those short-term funding streams from the province for that 1 year, in reality, we had a fund-based structural deficit in 2018 of over $4 million. We relied on operating our business in 2018 with those funds. So that's the left side. And again, on the left side, it's not on the slide, but if you want to look at the utility fund or Saint John Water, and you can see this in note 22 of the financial statement, Saint John Water actually ended up with a $52,000 surplus in 2018, very, very small from a fund-based perspective. So in the middle, you see all the adjustments we need to make to go through this process. We consolidate all these entities. We eliminate revenues and expenses between the entities. It's called inter-fund eliminations that's required. We add depreciation. We back off debt. We add accounting liabilities from an actuarial perspective that aren't fund-based or budget-based. And you end up with results that you see on the right side. And you'll see all those consolidated results that include a whole bunch of accounting entries that add up to the $22 million that you see on the financial statements. And I'll just highlight a couple of items. On the right, you'll see, of course, the general fund, which is a very small amount of that $22 million. The $8.1 million that you see in Saint John Water, that's mostly accounting adjustments. That's adding back depreciation, backing off debt, and the net result of all these accounting adjustments in capital funding that we receive, you end up with a number. But again, it's not transparent to what you see from a budget perspective. When I say that we eliminate transactions between entities, you'll see in Saint John Transit that's exactly what you see. When you eliminate grants between the city and Saint John Transit, and the grant provided, you see the overall net cost of operation on a consolidated basis of that business, $4.89 million. So the big item that sticks out is Saint John Energy. You'll see a $21 million surplus on there. When you look at their financial statements, their surplus from operating, from their operating business is about $5 million. There's a $15 million non-cash actuarial adjustment for pension purposes only that's required for accounting purposes that was been done to their statements in 2018. Unrealized transactions in investments in the pension that resulted in a unrealized gain. It's not a gain from operations. It's not a $21 million surplus from operations. So the math on the right-hand side is really the $22 million that you end up with on the statements. And I know this is very confusing, difficult to understand, but you really do have to have a little bit of financial knowledge and understanding and how to interpret these statements to draw conclusions from the statements. So I'll conclude with this. Fund accounting is very different than the accounting you see on our final financial statements. Interpreting the structural deficit in our operating budget is very different than interpreting the results of these consolidated statements. When reviewing the city's consolidated statements, it is important to refer to the notes, as the notes provide additional information and reconciliation to support the numbers that allows you to reconcile to our budgets. The consolidated statements of operations and accumulated surplus should not be analyzed by themselves so that we don't have a $600 and some million surplus that was pointed out the other night. You got to understand what you're looking at. There's no hidden, pot of gold that we say in the statement or money that we're not exposing in our financial statements. We do have a structural deficit, and I did want to give the Finance Committee one final opportunity to ask any questions that you would like with respect to these statements.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Any questions? Any questions?
I was going to ask
Mr.
you
Mayor?
where the hidden money is, Kevin, but I think you just explained it. No question, just a comment, I guess. It is, It is complex. I won't sort of rip the Band-Aid back off of our last council meeting, but I mean, it is complex. And so my serious question becomes, how do we continue to reflect on, maybe through you to the city manager, but on how do we break down this, continue to share and break down this complexity in a way that, the one-pagers have been a hit. I think I've shared those so many times on our other topics. Where does your money go? Where does it? We have to somehow break this down. And, it's unfortunate, a deliberate attempt to mislead the public in my words, and it wasn't true. And we do have a deficit, and it's already difficult enough then to play with people's emotions even further. So I guess my takeaway is to ask you and your department with the city manager to think about how do we break down this complexity? I did have somebody reach out the other day and share with me, Fredericton's budget book and Moncton's budget book, and in fact, I'm not knocking Moncton, but I haven't been able to find a detailed budget from Moncton. And my response to the citizen who was engaged said, "Look, I like this booklet." And I'm not trying to make excuses, but with everything we've got on our plate, with the projects that we have to get done over the next 60 days, and that's probably why we don't have a budget book. But when we stabilize ourselves, I'm pretty sure we can get you a nice glossy budget book, right? But anyway, I just ask you to take that away. How do we continue to engage with the public and help them understand, these numbers? And thank you.
Very good. Councilor Norton, please.
I just back up I just back up what the mayor said, whether it's a one-page infographic or whether it's something more personal from the chief magistrate himself, an op-ed, or whether it's an online video blog, or maybe it's something through communications that the commissioner is able to translate in a quick video op-ed, something like that. I think this council in particular, obviously, city manager, hats off to you and your leadership team, and to the mayor and his leadership. But I think there's been good teach-ins, and there's a better understanding of what eats up municipal budgets, whether that's operations here, wages and benefits here, salaries there, other unexpected events. Those sorts of things I think are really good from just educating our public. I never really thought of ourselves as schools, but the more I'm in the business, we've got a greater degree and greater responsibility to educate the public on exactly what makes up these types of statements, because if we don't teach them how to read financial plans, nobody else is going to do our homework for us. I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, city manager, please.
Mr. Chair, first of all, I'll say as city manager, we can always get better at communicating. The day we don't believe that is the day we should all throw in the towel, because we are no longer embracing our culture of continuous improvement. So we can always get better at communicating, and we will certainly continue to work on that with additional products, additional and different ways of messaging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At that point, I wouldn't be doing my staff justice if I didn't highlight a point on the myth busting and the perception busting that we have to engage in. It is time consuming. For example, just this particular example, and I don't want to pick on this one example, but it's the example we have in front of us. I would ask you to simply imagine the number of hours of work that has gone into preparing this presentation, taking time out of this committee hearing, et cetera, to debunk one comment from one presentation at one council meeting. And we are living through this time right now because so many things are on our plate and so many things are changing. We are spending quite a bit of our time simply debunking stuff that has been misperceived or misunderstood or misrepresented. And that is a challenge. One of our communication challenges moving forward is finding the time to address this.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions, comments? All right, yes, please, yeah. Seconded? All those in favor? And those opposed?
Should we send a copy to the unions as well, just so
No, I freed up my weekend because I was gonna come in and look for that 600 million.
698.
I would have stopped at 600. The last item, you're going to help us out there too, Commissioner?
So we want to do it right from here?
Yes, please.
Very good.
This is just a quick one. You'll recall, you've approved the budget back in December, our 2020 budget. With respect to LNG revenue, I think the report's quite self-explanatory, but when when the province repealed that legislation, that LNG legislation, part of the conditions of that repeal was that any risk with respect to a future appeal of the assessment base of LNG would fall back to the city. And on an annual basis, I guess the owner of the property would have up until April 1st to appeal the assessment. And we typically don't receive our confirmed LNG revenue from the province until subsequent to April 1st. This is it's 3 years in a row there's been no appeal. We felt that it's quite low risk with respect to not incorporating the LNG revenue into the budget in 2020, so we did. Also acknowledging if we don't get it, it's really a reclass between short-term financial assistance and LNG revenue for 2020. So we've received a call from the province with respect to our budget, and they indicated, although low risk, to conform to their provincial requirements and policies, procedures, they need a resolution of council that actually reconciles or matches the tax base without LNG, which is what we would have been issued in November, for them to satisfy their requirements, the regulation requirements. There's no impact on the overall budget. You'll see in the report the overall budget is the exact same. It's an adjustment between two revenue line items, but they do need that resolution from council in order to satisfy their requirements. So with that, the recommendations in the report.
Any comments, questions on the recommendation?
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. And those opposed? Straightforward. Thank you. And that's the last item. Conclude the meeting. Second. Adjourn, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, if they don't have, you can leave.
Sorry about the other day.
The first one we got was way too small. It was like almost too big, almost too small. Emergency management falls right line. Yeah. We knew it was growing. So we got a big one. And that's going to be probably something that's. Yeah. True, okay. Yeah.
Make sure there's border parties available. Because there's so like they college, states that have chewing response with much value. Yeah. All of this might be resources and everything together that you pay that. The reality is that it's very little value. It's big value. Yeah. Yeah. So all this is just literally. Yeah. Stakeholder.
Good work, sir.
What is your question?
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah. Yes, yes, no, we'll go. Thank you.
Okay, so we're foolishly contemplating, but what we're talking about here was on a 6-month-old issue.
Yes.
I just said, so what they do is they'll bring back ahead and they'll keep as a show.
Okay.
And then if for some reason it's not quite goes right well, I said they give you that one. Because they've already trained, they've already,
Our old guy, so he'd be like that. We wanted to
Yeah,
allow for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, we lost Kaz at first.
Are you looking? You get it? What is it? Nice. You want what? Luggage? Huge job. What's it pay? Nothing wrong with that. Starting out. I bet your climbs up pretty quick too. What's the hours like? So they call you on the media?
It's amazing to how young
When you're not moving luggage, what do you do?
Maintenance staff are, is a
Is it on the
presented, informed package, and all done before sunset. Same thing.
Get your blanket, just here?
My wife, absolute probation. She will count the minutes, like, we get 3 or 4 minutes a day, right? That's basically.
Yeah.
Despise her.
That's good. That's all right.
It's not bad.
Good restaurant out there too. So, no, that's good.
All right.
That's good.